My name is Jia Xiao, and I'm a senior psychology major with minors in public health and international business. My thesis explores cultural differences between China and the United States, specifically in what people think a compassionate facial expression looks like in response to another person's suffering. Research has shown that a compassionate response to another's suffering differs across cultural contexts. For example, the conceptualized facial expression of compassion in the United States has a slight smile, while the expression of the German face contains less happiness. This cultural difference is partially explained by avoidant negative affect, which is people's desire to avoid feeling negative emotions. US Americans tend to want to avoid feeling negative more than people from other cultures. While past research has mainly focused on Western samples, little has been done to investigate the relationship between culture, compassion, and avoidant negative affect in other cultures, especially those that are not weird, an acronym that stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. The present study investigates what a compassionate facial expression would look like in China, an East Asian cultural context and region of the world whose cultural characteristics distinctly differ from Western norms. First, let's explore how attitudes regarding emotion differ between the East and West. In American cultural contexts, positive emotions are indicative of an individual's self-reliance and independence, while negative emotions are discouraged. In contrast, East Asian cultures traditionally promote dialectical thinking, which encourages attending to both positive and negative aspects of positive and negative emotions. Furthermore, research has found consistencies of cultural differences in empathic responses. Compared to participants from Western cultures, East Asian participants have shown higher empathic accuracy, which means they were able to more accurately infer another person's emotions. Also, compared to Westerners, East Asians tend to report more personal distress, which is experiencing negative emotions resulting from another person's distress. Since negative emotions are more accepted in East Asian compared to US American cultures, we hypothesize that people in China would want to avoid feeling negative emotions to a lesser degree than US Americans. The literature suggests that the more people want to avoid negative emotions, the more they would perceive a compassionate face as one with a positive rather than a negative expression. If people in East Asian cultures are less inclined to avoid feeling negative, Chinese participants would perceive a compassionate face as one with an expression depicting less happiness and more sadness. Finally, we predicted that the cultural differences in the amount of happiness and sadness in people's representations of a compassionate face can be explained by how much they want to avoid feeling negative. We recruited our participants from Guangzhou University in China and here at Santa Clara University in the United States. To examine participants' mental representations of a compassionate face, we had them complete a reverse correlation task, which involved superimposing different patterns of computer-generated random noise onto an average female base face to create stimuli. For each stimulus, a new random noise pattern is created and superimposed onto the base face. The inverse of that pattern is superimposed onto a separate image of the base face, creating a pair of expressions. Participants were presented with 300 pairs of these faces, each pair consisting of one image with the original random noise pattern and the other with the inverse of that pattern. Participants were asked to please select the stimulus that most resembles a compassionate face and selected one image of the two that were presented. We produced an individual composite image, which is a face consisting of the average of all noise patterns each participant selected. We also produced two group composite images to examine what participants in each culture collectively think a compassionate face looks like. We did this using the reverse correlation R script, which superimposed the average of participants' selected noise patterns onto the base face, using an Asian base face for Chinese participants and a Caucasian base face for US participants. We recruited two female research assistants at SCU, one Caucasian and the other East Asian, to code the amount of happiness and sadness for all the individual composite images. Participants also completed the Affect Valuation Index, which measured the degree to which they actually feel, ideally want to feel, and want to avoid feeling 37 emotional states. Here are the resulting group composite images, which show what participants from the US and China think a compassionate face looks like. We were able to replicate the American compassionate face from previous studies. What does the Chinese compassionate face look like to you? To me, it looks sad and concerned, and that's exactly what we found. As predicted, US Americans wanted to avoid feeling negative significantly more than Chinese participants. In addition, Chinese individual composite images contained significantly more sadness and less happiness than American ones. Furthermore, avoidant negative affect partly explained cultural differences in the sadness ratings of the composite images. In terms of future directions, we are currently working on a similar study to see if we can replicate these findings among European Americans and Asian Americans. This research demonstrates that culture influences people's conceptualizations of a compassionate facial expression, which has significant implications for therapeutic contexts and what it means to be compassionate in an increasingly globalized and connected world. Thank you very much for listening.